outdoor athletic facilities pre-application webinar. Thank you so much, Monica, for getting that started. We are recording this webinar for the benefit of those that may not be able to join us right now, and also for some of you who may wish to go back and take a look at some of the information that we're sharing. So thank you very much for joining us today. I just want to share with you that today's agenda includes just some general information about our program purpose. We're going to talk a little bit about eligibility, the money, because everybody wants to know about the money. We're going to talk about evaluation process and the criteria, and then some additional considerations that you'll want to know if you intend to apply. And then we'll talk a little bit about applying online for those of you that are not familiar with our process, and then try to our best throughout to take time to answer some of your questions. I think there's a place where you can drop a question in, and we will pause from time to time to give an opportunity to do that. My name is Marguerite Austin. I am the section manager for the Recreation and Conservation Grants team here at the Recreation and Conservation Office. On behalf of our director, Megan Duffy, I just want to welcome you and thank you for joining us for what is going to be a very exciting grant opportunity. This is the first time we've been able to offer grants for this particular program, and we've tried to make it as accessible as possible. And so today we're going to be sharing information for you to make it hopefully easy for you to figure out what's an appropriate and eligible project and how to apply. With me today is Nick Norton, and Nick Norton is one of our policy specialists, and he, along with Leah Dowie, has been very involved in helping to get this program off the ground and running. So Nick, do you want to just say hi, just to do a quick check to make sure we can hear you?
Hi, everybody. Nick Norton here. Hopefully my sound's working. I may run into Marguerite's office and share that screen instead later, but looking forward to our time together. Thank you, Marguerite.
Thanks, Nick. And the other staff member that's going to be very instrumental in helping us out today is Henry Smith. Henry, do you want to do a quick check just to make sure we can hear you and see you? There you are.
Hey, everybody. Can you hear me okay?
Awesome. Yes, we can. And you have our latest logo. We are celebrating our 60th anniversary, and Henry is on top of everything. So Henry is going to be watching the Q and answer portion to try to help. And from time to time, we'll pause to give him a chance to share some of the questions that you may have that we haven't answered in our presentation. So thank you, Henry. And last, I think, is Monica Atkins. Monica is our administrative team member, and she is doing her best to help keep things up and running. And she is actually working on making sure this meeting is being recorded. So thank you very much. So just to keep running, and by the way, we'll take time for questions, but from time to time, if something pops up for you, by all means, jot it down. So we do have an opportunity to ask questions. You can get that into the chat or get it to the Q&A section. So the first thing I wanted to just share with you, this program is the result of a lot of work by a number of individuals. And I have to call out Adam Cole, because Adam Cole has been working with a high-level advisory committee and a whole technical review team to get this program up and ready to go. And he's turned it over. So Nick and Leah and Kyle and myself have all had a chance to jump in and to try to help get it ready to go. So big thanks goes to Adam Cole for all the work he's put into it. As Adam worked with the leadership team, what you see reflected here today is part of the key features that that team came forward with. And the bottom line is, this is a grant program that provides grants to build, expand, or renovate outdoor athletic facilities. The program is uniquely focused on helping to support meaningful athletic experiences in communities that, and as you can see, there are three key areas: those that lack recreational opportunities, those that have underserved populations, and those that possess limited financial capability. The reason we want to share that is it will help you to understand much better our two-step application process, as well as how the funds will be dispersed and distributed, and what the priorities are that are included in our evaluation criteria. First of all, eligible applicants. Hopefully you see yourselves reflected in this table that's listed. Eligible applicants, of course, include our local governments. We are really focused on local community park type facilities, and that includes folks that provide those opportunities. So you'll see we provide grants to cities, counties, and towns, to Native American tribes. There's also special purpose districts or other districts that uniquely work with community outdoor athletics. And then you'll see we also make these grants available to qualified nonprofit organizations. You'll notice that the focus for those are those that are registered with the Secretary of State's office. They have to be active in community outdoor athletics for a few years. And they have to remember that whatever facilities they're asking us to build, to renovate, to purchase, or maintain must be open to the public. There's no such thing as exclusive use, and that organization cannot be an organization that discriminates against one group or another. Key things. So hopefully you've been able to see yourselves in this list, from park districts to local communities. We're hoping to make those grants available to a wide range of organizations and individuals. You want to know what types of grants we're making available? We're making grants available so that you could acquire property. This might be property to expand an athletic complex or park facilities. That's where you're going to place athletic sports fields or something along those lines. We provide grants for you to do new development, new construction, or to renovate some of your existing facilities. And then a few of you may have grants where you're doing a combination. You need to buy some property and you want to get something developed, and you've got the resources and the perfect site that you want to bring forward. Those are the types of applications you can submit. So you can see it's acquisition, development, or renovation, as well as a combination of those two. Some terms you will hear us use from time to time throughout this process is that eligible project types or eligible projects have to have a couple of things happening. Number one, every project must include what we call an inbounds element. And as you can see on the screen, hopefully it's dark enough and contrast enough for you to see, inbounds elements are things like within the field of play. They are essential for the competitive sport to occur. And so examples of things that are inbounds is you're actually working on the field itself, or the court itself, the sport facility itself. So that might include installing an irrigation or drainage system. It might include replacing regular turf with artificial turf. You could be working on this resurfacing an existing court for a tennis court, or building a pickleball court, or something along those lines. And it also includes field lighting. So it's things, when you think about it, if fields or courts or whatever it is, it's not general security lighting. It's actually all about providing the facilities that will allow play. Out of bounds elements are typically things that are associated with your athletic facility. However, those things may not be essential to have play happening. They're usually outside the field of play. So an example is they're not essential for play. They sometimes are classified as support amenities, and examples of those kind of things are bleachers. You don't actually have to have bleachers for somebody to play, but bleachers are nice for family members that are coming to enjoy the sporting activity that's going on. Or you're doing access paths or a trail around your facility where people have a chance to get a little exercise at the same time they're watching the game. A restroom facility is not essential. Well, some of you would probably say it is essential, but it is what we classified as a support amenity. Things like restrooms and parking and signage and some of those other things that help to make your facility nice. So the terms are in bounds, meaning it's involving the field of play, or out of bounds, which are typically support elements or amenities. The next thing I want to speak to you about are what are eligible facilities. And there's a quote on here, and hopefully you can see it, but I'll just read it. It says, community outdoor athletic facilities should attract and accommodate practice, training, and/or competition that's utilizing the user's physical skills or capabilities. So these activities are the primary focus of the facility rather than leisure activities which rely on equipment. An example of what might be considered a leisure activity might be something like snowmobile riding. It's fun, but it relies more on the snowmobile or the vehicle. That's like off-road four-wheel drive riding, or it could be hang gliding. So some of those things that don't really relate as much to the individual's physical ability, those are the things that we're not targeting. We're really targeting those activities that focus on your own physical capability. So here are examples of the types of facilities that this grant program is targeting and that we hope to fund. You might see projects that involve fields. So the kinds of fields we're talking about might include baseball, cricket, football, lacrosse, softball, soccer, and/or multi-purpose fields that oftentimes involve both softball and soccer or some similar play. And then there might be some open space that used for practice fields. So there may be a part of your project that involves something along those lines. The other thing that we provide funds for are hard courts or court facilities. So think about things like basketball court, futsal, hockey, pickleball courts. It could be something like a tennis court or skate park facility. This also would include a volleyball court. Even though it's not a hard surface, that would be the type of court facilities when we talk about our courts. Other eligible facilities include things like swimming pools. And keep in mind, the focus for swimming pools is really on pools for competitive type sports, usually those with lanes, diving boards that can offer that kind of activity. It doesn't have to have a diving board, but typically they are metered pools where there can be some type of competition. The kinds that are not eligible would be things like a typical spray park, a therapy pool, or just a wading pool. Those do not meet the eligibility criteria for this program. Another kinds of things is all kinds of track facilities. So when we talk about tracks, there's a variety. So think of something like a BMX track or a pump track or facilities for track and field activities. It could be a velodrome or an outdoor gym type track facility. It might be a challenge course or a climbing wall. Those fall into the category of maybe tracks. That type of activity or facility is eligible. Thinking about tracks for motorized recreation, that's not typically eligible in our grant program. Another element that you might want to consider is recreation facilities that don't fall into those other categories. For example, an archery range or an ice skating rink. How about disc golf or something like just a golf course itself? You think about an activity that's associated with horseback riding or something that's tied to mountain biking and mountain bike trails. This program would also run facilities associated with sports like rowing and kayaking. You kind of think about it that, windsurfing would be another. One way I tell people to think about the sport facilities, if it's an Olympic activity, it may actually be one of the things that we would allow grants for, trying to prepare, teach people, train them for those kinds of sport for leisure, recreation, or competitive sporting events. So eligible infrastructure includes some other things. So here's an example of some of the things that you might want to think about when we talk about eligible infrastructure. These are the kinds of things that's associated oftentimes with the sporting facilities we've just described. So think about drainage and irrigation systems that you need to make sure your fields are available for the sporting activity. And then what about field lighting or lighting for your sport court? Then there's dugouts. It's hard to do certain kind of activities without those ancillary facilities that go along with that sport. And then think about fencing. You know, you need outfield fencing. Sometimes you're asking for funds for certain types of portable fences that allow you to convert a multi-purpose field from softball to soccer or something along those lines. And then, of course, you probably need scoreboards, especially and signage, especially for those areas where you're offering competitive activities. And then don't forget about accessibility within the field of play. People with all types of abilities are involved and engaged in sporting activities, so you want to make sure you're covering that as well when you plan your recreation opportunity. And then we have eligible support amenities. These are the things that help to make it a functional, usable recreation area. So you think about things like parking areas and restrooms. Think about bleachers and landscaping and signs. There might be docks that are needed for some of the water access facilities. And then what about every so often you might need something to entertain the youngsters while older children or adults are playing. So you might have some small play structure that you need to include, or an access road or a better access. Those are the kind of facilities that fall into eligible categories. And then this last little group of eligible items is the one that what you need to make your facility functional or to implement your project. So for example, if you're acquiring property, there's all kinds of acquisition incidentals that you don't want to forget. For example, you're going to have to do an appraisal, get an appraisal review. Title insurance is required, recording those documents with your county courthouse. You'll have to do things like purchase, you might need to do a survey. So acquisition incidentals are eligible. Or what about pre-construction materials for those development or those kind of items for those development or renovation projects? That's the architectural engineering design cost, bid cost for putting out your bid documents, doing cultural resources for either an acquisition or a development project, securing the appropriate permits or other kinds of environmental documents. And then for all of our grants, we allow you to bill us for administrative costs. So think about just the project administration. You have bills that might be associated with construction supervision, doing your progress reports for RCO, submitting your bills to RCO, and closing out and taking care of all the closeout, just the closeout of a project once you're done. And then, of course, there are sometimes amenities that are associated with the inbounds elements. For example, you can do a baseball field, but you actually need the bases to make that field function, or you need the goals for your basketball court or your soccer field. And then sometimes there's required fencing or nets. It's what will make that facility functional. So when I talk about those items, I do have to mention the things that are not eligible. So keep in mind that this is a capital improvement program. So there are some capital facilities that are not eligible. I'm not going to dwell a lot on those, but you can see a list here. But just another thing to remind you that you have to take care of with your own resources are some of those non-capital items like the bats and the balls and the rackets and consumable supplies and other things that are out of bounds, or just even an out of bounds only project. does not fit the eligibility criteria for this program. So hopefully that gives you a little bit of an idea of some of the things that are eligible, some things that are not eligible. It's not all inclusive. You can look at our policy guidance materials and that will help you. And then of course we have other resources to help. So I'm just going to pause for a moment to give an opportunity for us to just field a few questions that might be popping up. And Henry, you have one or two questions that we might need to answer for everybody around eligibility?
Yeah, here's a good one. So this attendee asked if there's a difference between COAF and youth athletic facilities, and is COAF not limited to youth sports?
So that's a good question. Both of the programs allow you to, the youth athletic facilities program is really more focused on youth athletics. However, we allow folks to do facilities that may be designed for community athletics as well as for youth. This program allows the same things. So if you are familiar with our youth athletic facilities programs, these programs are quite a bit similar in terms of what is eligible and what they allow. Some things to think about. This program allows a little bit more in terms of eligible support items that would not be allowed in youth athletic facilities. So yes, these are very similar programs. However, the emphasis in terms of the scoring criteria is different.
And then we've got several eligibility questions for different amenities, and I would encourage folks to just reach out to their grants manager. But one that I think might be worth addressing, Marguerite, is would you consider things like docks for a rowing center to be an eligible cost? Do you want to talk a little bit about in-water stuff?
Exactly, that would be an eligible element. And you might even have some upland things that go along with it, but that is one of the things that we talked about as being something that's eligible. You just want to talk to us about your sailing facility or your dock facility, talk about the competition and the training that you offer, and then we can work with you to make sure that it meets our eligibility criteria. So, and Henry, while you're checking to see if there's something else to answer, I'm just going to put a couple of questions to address some things that people may not have thought to ask just yet. And Nick, feel free to jump in at any time. This one question is about, are concessions eligible? While you are allowed to build your own concession facilities, grant funds are not being used for those kind of concession activities. Oftentimes you'll see somebody that's doing a building that might have restrooms and scoreboard attached and some storage for that recreation facility. We will pay for those elements of the building, but the concession part is something that you have to take care of on your own. Another question that we also get oftentimes when people are talking to us about this program is, do I need a comprehensive outdoor recreation plan to apply? Some of you are familiar with our programs where a plan is an eligibility requirement. It is not for the Community Outdoor Athletic Facilities Program. If you do have a plan, that's great, because that helps to determine what priorities your community has set and why you are submitting a particular project, and it's information that you may want to include in your responses to the evaluation criteria by letting the evaluators know how that project fits in your priority plan, but it's not a requirement. Another question that oftentimes pops up is about indoor facilities or covered facilities. We don't allow indoor recreation facilities. However, you could put a picnic style type shelter over a court so you have more use, or there's some other options for swimming pools. You could use a shade structure or something along those lines. So that's one of the other items that Just to give you a heads up, it's something you do want to talk to your grants manager about, just to make sure what you're thinking is eligible. And this is a question that we get all the time that says, who can help me determine if my project is eligible? And Henry just mentioned that, and I'm glad you have that same question as well, because we have a team of folks who are standing by. They can't wait to help you figure out the eligibility of your project. Just keep in mind, they may be getting a lot of calls, so be patient, but they will get to you ASAP. You can send them an email or a note right away, and they will make arrangements if they're in your area, they will stop in to take a look at your facility. And one of the things you will be able to do starting today is starting your pre-application process, and RCO will assign one of these grant managers to help answer your questions, to review your application, and to help walk you through the process. Are there other questions about eligibility that we need to ask or answer?
I wonder if you want to summarize one more time the inbounds element versus the supporting out of bounds elements.
Thank you, Henry. So when we talk about inbounds, we are talking about what's on the field of play. And by field of play, it's the actual recreation facility. So an inbounds would be the tennis court, the basketball court, the BMX track, the softball field, the multi-purpose field itself. Inbounds are things that are on the field of play. Out of bounds are typically things that support you, but they are not on the field of play. Bleachers are usually alongside the field of play, but dugouts are kind of essential for folks that are playing sports like baseball or softball. There's an area that we use for them, and that, along with your field, is totally eligible as part of an inbounds element. If your project involves out of bounds elements or you're concerned about it, grant managers can help you figure that out. And by the way, ever so often somebody will have a very expensive out of bounds elements, and they'll throw in one or two inbounds elements that typically is not going to fly with evaluators. You want to make sure the focus of your project is what's classified as the field of play. So just want to make sure you pay attention to that, and we are more than happy to help you to work through that. Anything else we need to cover right now for evaluation before we move on?
I think you're welcome to go ahead. There's quite a few questions in the chat, but most of them I think you're going to address a little later on.
Well, great. Well, thank you so much. I am going to turn this over to Nick Norton, our policy specialist, who's going to share information with you about the money and the evaluation process. Nick, let's trade places.
Thank you, Marguerite. Hi, everybody. Again, this is Nick Norton. I'm a policy specialist here at RCO. Had the opportunity and the pleasure to work on this particular project. And like Marguerite said, I'll talk a bit about the dollars and cents, a bit about the application process itself, and the evaluation and how those kind of happen together over time, because it is a bit of a different sequence than we usually do. So we want to try and be as clear as we can about that process. For COAF, it is a regionally based program. So we've divided the state into 5 funding regions. For those of you who may be familiar with RCO and have worked with us for a long time, you may have seen some of this in older iterations of the youth athletic facilities. So there's some components to this that may be similar to you, but functionally speaking, each of these regions acts as a separate entity for the purposes of receiving funding or being allocated funding and evaluation and competition. So another way of saying that, for example, is Sequim and Clallam County is not going to be, in the same competitive pool as, say, Colfax and Whitman County. They're in their different regions, and that's where that competition allocation happens. So here's a table where we actually show you how that breaks out. And one of the things I want to be clear about is that for COAF, we're statutorily required to allocate funding based on the population of the particular region. And so that's what underlies this table that you see here, and which you'll see in the grant manual on our website. And so in those regions right now, we have 12 million in funding that the legislature has allocated to us that we have secured now. They've also put in a line item, there's an opportunity during the legislative process to say, we are predicting and budgeting future costs. They've also put in for the next biennium an additional 12 million in project funding. So we're paying attention to both what we've secured and what we're anticipating for the next legislative session and biennium as part of this process. So I want to try and be as clear as possible. But in terms of what we know we have in hand, and that can go, immediately once we make awards to projects, this is the table that shows how that would shake out. So for example, the Western region has, 1.9 million. The Southeast has 1.3, and the South Sound, which is the most populous counties in the state, has 5.4. And in terms of a grant limits for this opportunity, there's a minimum of 50,000 and then a maximum of 1.2 million. And that 1.2 million was arrived at as trying to be as high as possible, but while also, we wanted to be able to fully fund at least one project, in the Southeast region and the Northeast region, for example, which are, maxing out with our current funding at about 1.2. So that was the rationale, but we probably would have gone higher. We had a goal in making sure that we could fund, all of the large significant project to the extent we can with this money as part of part of the equity goals of the program. And then I did want to emphasize this, I think it was on the previous slide, but one thing that is novel about COAF here is that we're not requiring any match. So that means that, if your project itself, for example, is $1 million, you can ask for all of that through this program. We're not requiring that you have some sort of outside funding that you're bringing in and matching with ours to get the project done. So that's a key novel feature of this program, and I wanted to call that out pretty explicitly here. Here's the other table. We wanted to show it, adding in that potential additional 12 million that the legislature has sort of budgeted for the next biennium. So what that functionally would do in each region would double the amount of money that would be available for us to award through this, this grant round. So for example, the Western region would jump to 3.9 million, South Sound at 10.8, and the Northeast at 2.4. All the way across the board, there would be a doubling. And what I want to, I'll talk a bit about, there's a two-step funding, there's a two-step application process, which we'll go into, as well as a two-step funding. So I'm going to talk about the sort of two-step funding here. It's a little bit cart before the horse, I realize, as I'm now talking, but hopefully we'll kind of close the loop on all those and how they interact by the time I'm done talking. So let's just take this hypothetical funding table here. Let's pretend this is from one region. Again, the projects are not themselves representative of that, or the numbers are not necessarily representative of a specific region, but this hypothetical I think will work for our example today. So let's say this is the list of, we invited 8 projects to submit final applications. Again, that would be the sort of second step in a two-step process that we'll go into a little bit more. Of those 8, when they ranked out according to the criteria, there was enough money in a region to fund the top 2 and then part of the third one. So we weren't able to get all the way to that full 1.2 request for the third project with the existing money we have on hand. So that would be something that we would do in October. We would make those awards for those projects. And then depending on what happens, again, in the next legislative session, we will know in April of 2025 if we did get an additional $12 million. And what we would do is then we would take that and we would fund further down that list of final applications in ranked order. So for example, you see now, if we get that additional chunk of money, we're able to fully fund that third ranked project as well as the next 4. And that 8th one would serve as an alternate in case, one of the other ones fall through or they didn't need as much money. We might be able to go down the list further and fund that in some form. So that's kind of the 2-step funding process that we have designed for COAF. And like I said, this is the slide where I'd like to kind of walk through pretty clearly the 2-step application process and then that 2 steps in funding and kind of see visually. We wanted to make sure you could see that how they work in time together. So the key take home, I think, for this slide is that this is going to be done through one grant cycle. So this call for pre-applications and this webinar, this is that opportunity. I think the key take home for this slide for me is don't miss out on this. This is your opportunity to have that foot in the door. So, this first phase is, a relatively simple pre-application. We'll talk a little bit more about what that looks like later, but we're opening that opportunity now. There will be an evaluation process that goes into that. And then based on what we see in our different regions in terms of pre-applications and amounts of requests and the number of projects, we'll make decisions about, inviting people to submit a final application. That would be the second step. Then there's another evaluation process that goes into that and scoring and ranking within each region. And then we have that initial funding in October of this year. And then, a second round of funding as funding is available in May of 2025. So that's how they kind of pair together in space and time. So I think the key is, we'll be using this pre-application process as a way to gather the need and demand around the state and develop that list now. So this 2-month period between today and when we will close on March 13th, that is really the key opportunity to get your foot in the door. And I wanted to briefly mention this sort of pre-application and final application is a novel approach for us. And in part, it's informed by some of the goals of this program. We wanted to allow organizations and communities that may lack the, sort of technical capacity or just raw, human capacity to put in a more complex application that we might ask for in other programs. And to, get your foot in the door and tell your story and the importance of a project, even if it's still, in the more conceptual stages. So part of the objectives, the funding objectives of this program and the equity goals we wanted to do the pre-app for that. It also helps us to gather the true need for, shovel-ready projects across the state that help us show that demand, to legislators and decision makers who, have a stake in, what gets funded. So it also has that, and it also allows us hopefully to right size the amount of work for you as a potential applicant relative to the competitiveness of the program. We expect, given that there's no match and, broad eligibility in terms of who can apply, that we may see a lot of interest in the program. And we have less money in it than we initially did when we started out. So we wanted to find a way to tailor that. If there's projects that perhaps just aren't as competitive given our criteria, we don't want you to spend a ton of time and energy going through that process that we might normally ask in some of our other programs. So there's a bit of right sizing that will hopefully happen as a result of this 2-step process as well. I wanted to kind of lay those out because I think it's important because this is a pretty novel approach relative to how we normally operate as a grant-making entity. I'll take a second to talk about the applications itself, the pre-applications and sort of limits on how many, where, that type of thing. So some of the key questions, I assume many of you are wondering are, how many pre-applications may a single applicant submit? There isn't a limit on how many you're able to submit. Either within a region, if you're an entity that spans multiple regions, for example, you could submit multiple pre-applications in multiple regions, and that's totally fine. However, we, in an interest in having a distributive funding opportunity, we won't be funding any more than one project per applicant in a single region. So, just knowing that, if you put in multiple ones, there's only one that will eventually get funded, regardless of how all of them may rank out in the process. May an applicant include multiple sites in an application? So for this COAF program, the answer is no. It would have to be something that exists on a single park site as part of an application. If there's something else you want to do that's an important project for you that would be eligible, that would have to be part of a separate pre-application. And then there's the question of, can this grant match other RCO grants? And the answer is yes, to an extent. So for example, the question I was asked earlier, is this similar to the Youth Athletic Facilities program, or YAF? It is. So it may be that you're interested in, for this upcoming grant cycle that we're opening up soon, that you may want to apply for COAF and also look at, YAF as, a matching source. And YAF does have matching requirements, for example. So you could use COAF to serve as that match. So yes, it can be used for those type of things for the upcoming biennium. However, if there's a project that was an RCO funded project, say, 2 or 3 years ago, and you're looking for more money now because the costs have increased or something like that, COAF wouldn't be a way, or wouldn't be available for someone to backfill, a cost increase from a previous RCO funded project. But for this upcoming kind of grant cycle for our Washington Wildlife and Recreation program or our YAF program, COAF could certainly serve as a matching source for those. So now I'm going to talk a little bit about the evaluation, and specifically I'm going to talk mostly today about the evaluation of the pre-application, because that's the step we're on. That's the opportunity that we've opened up today. And before I do that, I want to recognize the fact that, we'll talk a little bit about the different kinds of criteria we have, but all of the sort of narrative, answers to questions that you'll be giving us as part of the pre-application, they will be reviewed and scored by an advisory committee, a diverse advisory committee of people across the state with expertise, in local parks and community athletics. So that list is here. People who have volunteering their time to help, make sure that we fund good things and we get good work done on the ground. So that's first off a thank you to these folks, and also recognizing that, this is the group that will be doing the bulk of that review and evaluation. In terms of the pre-application, I'll speak just very briefly to, we've designed it in PRISM, which is our grant management system and where we typically accept applications, to be as simple as possible, while also giving you a chance to have some nuance and, the nature of the project and why it's important. And specifically, the bulk of the application really deals with answering kind of 2 narrative questions about, the need for the project and its impact, and then also the community and the applicant's need for, support and resources that this grant opportunity can provide. Collectively, those questions will be worth 80% of the total points for the pre-application. And then we also will be scoring RCO itself will be scoring database criteria. That'll be worth a total of up to 8 points, or 20% of the total amount for the pre-application. And those are things that are based on the location of the project in the state, as well as the nature of the specific applicant who's applying and their history with RCO. So that's the point breakdown out of a total of 40 points. Again, I want to reiterate, the majority of it are those 2 points those 2 questions that are scored by the advisory committee. And we'll go through these in a bit more detail in the coming slides. So one is this project need and impact. And so that would be a question, that basically asks you why this project would be a game changer in the community, and gives you some things to think about as you put that answer together. How would the project redefine youth and community athletic opportunities and overall quality of life in the area? How the project meets a known unmet demand. That may be something that comes from a park and recreation plan that you have that Marguerite might have mentioned. Those are great ways to identify that need and articulate it in the context of a grant application. And then also, perhaps how the project specifically provides access to underserved populations as you understand that and apply that term locally. And then the second question would be evaluated by the advisory committee would be around the community and applicant need. And specifically, we'd be asking, what resource barriers do you and your community experience that get in the way of making this project a reality? And this question is really informed by, the desire to help elevate different areas of the state that we may not have invested in before, and really focusing on those things that get in the way of these important projects in places that may not have been funded or may lack that capacity. So some things to consider as you answer that would be, lack of available financing for facility development. Maybe you don't have access to local conservation futures, or, there's no clear capital purchasing power as part of your, your city or your town's budget, for example. Those would be things that would be very salient things to know for us and evaluators as they look to rank and score these projects. It might be staffing constraints that limit fundraising and your, overall project management capacity, or a lack of internal expertise for project design and construction that could help be remedied by this investment and opportunity to have some, further design and bring in an engineer who can do some of those drawings. So those are the two major point sources would be those questions. And then in terms of the database criteria, all of them are, except for number 9 here, are yes, no. So basically, if you meet that threshold, you would get the point. If you don't, then you wouldn't get it. So it'd be a 1 or a 0 points. And I'll run through them very quickly here. And certainly I'll talk about opportunities for you to understand what your score would be. One would be if the project is in a census tract with a poor health outcome rank of 7 or higher, according to the Washington Tracking Network. If the project is in a census tract where the median household income is below the state mean. If it's a small community, there's also a point for racially diverse communities, 35% or more with residents or people of color, a high population density one, as well as a facility access ratio, which is the number of publicly accessible community athletic sites per 1,000 residents. And then we also have a 2-point question that's a tiered one around if the applicant has received, an RCO recreation grant in the past. If you haven't received one in the last 8 years, you'd get a point. If you've never received one, you'd get 2. So we're trying to build in some opportunity to elevate new applicants in this program. And both in the grant manual that we've published on the website as of last night, as well as on the website, there's a direct link. There's actually a place you can go to find out what your scores would be for these different things, all of those things that are based on the location of the project. So if you go to that link, you'll see this map, and on the bottom right, you'll see all the different kind of layers that are relevant to those different points. And then on the left would be something that you would fill in once you click on a particular location. So we'll go to the next slide. So this is what it looks like when you join. You would zoom in, find your spot where your project is going to be, click on it. And we decided to do an example in Bridgeport. So what you can see over here on the left is after we clicked on it, it shows that of those location-based, database criteria, Bridgeport would receive 4 points. 1 for median household income, they would get the small communities point, the racially diverse community point, as well as the facility access ratio point for a total of 4. On the bottom right over there, those different layers, if you're interested in seeing across the state, for example, which areas would get the poor health outcomes point, you can also click on that eyeball, and actually zoom back out, and it would show you everywhere there. And you could look at 2 or 3 layers and where they might overlap, so you can understand how these criteria interact in space across the state. If you're wanting to be more strategic, or you have multiple opportunities and you're looking at which one might score the best. So I'm just resharing the makeup here. Not going to go through it, but really just a chance for me to kind of close the loop here and say, these are the pre-application points. So, these will be used to make a list, and then we'll have to make region by region strategic decisions about how we move to the final application. And these scores will be rolled over and merged with the final application scores when those are developed. We had hoped that we'd have those completed by the time we opened this up, but we are kind of furiously working on the final application criteria and the scoring for that. And we plan to share that out so everybody has that as soon as possible, so to support your sort of overall decision making about, you know, your approach to the grant opportunity. There was a lot there. So Henry, I don't know if there are a few questions that came up that I can try and answer now, but happy to take them if we have a few minutes here.
Yeah, that sounds good. Everyone's keeping me busy in the chat. The first thing that I'm seeing thematically is, are we allowing multi-site projects, or are projects limited to one park?
Yeah, and I hit on that. I'll just reiterate that. So we're not allowing multi-site projects in COAF. So your project would have to be in one project area, you know, in your park. If you have multiple eligible opportunities that you think are a good fit here, you are able to parse those out as separate pre-applications at separate parks. So yeah, so we don't allow for at the level of an individual pre-application, a multi-site project. But you're not limited to, you know, if you have 3 great projects and you think they all have, you know, a good chance, you can parse those out as 3 different pre-applications at 3 different sites.
And then, does work under the grant need to be included in a previous comp plan or capital improvement plan, or can it be a new project that wasn't included in the last comp plan?
Yeah, it can be a new project that wasn't included. And, you know, there are many communities that are interested in accessing this funding that may not have an existing parks, recreation, and open space plan. And we don't want that to be an impediment to telling your story and getting a chance to be considered for funding. Having said that, though, having something, you know, a project that is a high priority on an established open space or parks and recreation plan certainly helps to tell, you know, that's something that evaluators certainly look for, you know, and probably cue in on when they're doing their ranking in terms of the need and sort of meeting a known unmet demand. So it's not a requirement, but it certainly can be a helpful piece of answering some of those narrative questions.
Can you talk a little bit about the long-term obligations for an acquisition project and for a development project for COAF?
You know, it's the long-term obligations, and we'll actually talk, Marguerite's going to talk about that in a little bit here. So I think we'll hit on that, but I think the key for right now is that the architecture of that is very similar to what it would be, you know, for other programs. We're not redefining the nature of the long-term obligation that you would have from, you know, the youth athletic facilities program or from our other projects that allow acquisitions. But again, we'll get into more detail, I think, in a moment.
Okay, and then we will make sure we post a link to the mapping tool that you're talking about.
Yeah, so it's embedded in the grant manual when we start talking about the evaluation. And then it's also under general resources if you go to the COAF website. And I think Marguerite might do a little tour of that later. So it's in 2 spots that hopefully is relatively easy to find and to work through. We've tried to make it fairly user-friendly.
And a clarification question. So when you said does merging your scores, what does that mean? Are they averaged? Are they just added on to the later evaluation scores?
Yeah, I think maybe the most precise language, I guess, is they would be added on. So for example, you know, the pre-application is worth 40 points. Let's say you got 30 out of 40. And let's say the final application is perhaps worth 60. So whatever you get for the final, you would add that 30 points to whatever you got for the final application, and that would determine your final rank. So we're not wanting to lose that, in, you know, the importance of your story and your resource barriers as part of moving to the next phase. So they will carry over. I hope that helped to clarify.
I think that's probably pretty good for now. I know we're running low on time. So if you have other questions that don't get answered, definitely reach out. You can reach out to me directly. My email's in the chat and I'll connect you where you need to be.
Thanks, Henry, and I'll turn it back to Marguerite.
Thank you, Nick. We are going to continue on to talk a little bit about some additional considerations. We're not going to spend a lot of time on this because this is more relevant to those that actually end up with the successful project, meaning you are invited to participate in the final competition. But it's important information for you to know because it'll help you select your project site. It should also help you to think about some of those costs or things that you might not be considering in advance. So here are some additional considerations that are highlighted in the policy guidelines that are posted on our website. As you can see, we'll talk through a few of those, but just a brief reminder about what these are. So the first ones I want to talk to you about are our manuals and authorization. RCO has a lot of policy materials that are available to you. If you are doing a development project, you will definitely want to not only look at the guidance for community outdoor athletic facilities, but you'll also probably want to take a look at our guidelines for development projects. That'll give you a little bit more information about some of the things you might need to consider. And if you have questions, sometimes it's just easier to ask a grant manager, where can I find more information about X? The other thing is you'll notice we included the Youth Athletic Facilities Program Manual. And one of the reasons we included it here is because while our community outdoor athletic facility guidance is kind of the pre-application material, doesn't have a lot of meat to it, Youth Athletic Facilities gives you even more information about athletic facilities, inbounds elements, and all of that kind of information. So that will also help to give you a little bit of guidance. If you plan to purchase property, our acquisition manual 3 would be important to you. And then, of course, there are the long-term obligations and reimbursements. Everybody wants to know about how to make sure they can get their money. The other part that's listed up here is about securing appropriate authorization. Sometimes community folks get really excited about a project and submit a pre-application or pre-proposal. You want to make sure that you've run it through your governing body and so that they can determine who is the official authorized representative for that project or that proposal. It doesn't have to be the applicant. We will just be asking you to sign some papers that tell us who's the official authorized representative. We want to know who's going to prepare and submit the grant application, and then who will sign the agreement if it's awarded, and who will sign amendments or who will submit bills. It's that kind of information that we'll be asking you about. It's not something to get too excited about now, except for who's authorized to submit that application. The next thing I just want to remind you about is every applicant has to have control of the land. Policy manual number 4 will give you some guidance on what we mean by control of the land. Do you own it? Do you lease it? Do you have a long-term use agreement that might meet our eligibility criteria? Do you plan to purchase an easement? This is one of the things that you'll want to know about when you're talking about where you're going to site your project. The next thing is about cultural resources. Most of you already know that we try to take a look at every single project that comes to our agency to check and see about its impact to historic and cultural resources. Our goal is not to damage something that's important or significant. And so you want to plan for that by including cost in case you have to have a cultural resources survey. Or maybe you will need to do some additional testing, or you might need to have an on-site monitor when you're actually doing the construction or renovation work. Or you may need something that does a building inventory to help determine whether it's eligible for as a historic structure or if your project is going to impact it in any way. Don't forget to include costs for that. And never start work until you get an RCO notice to proceed, which we will only grant after we've cleared things for cultural resources. And then about designing for accessibility. I know you don't need me to tell you this, but I always like to remind you because most people think about accessibility when they're building a parking lot. They'll think about it for a building, but oftentimes they forget about it when they're thinking about their outdoor recreation facility. So, for example, think about, are your dugouts such that somebody that might need to use a wheelchair or have some other mobility device, can they get in and out? What about for your field of play? What about your seating areas? Are they designed to accommodate family members that might need to use an assisted device? You want to make sure that whatever you're designing for your recreation facility, that your gates are wide enough, that your access paths are in place. So make sure you include the budget and think about it early on so you can have those costs. We will not approve final payment for your project if it's not designed for accessibility. So if you have questions about what you might need to do, let's talk about it during the application phase so you make sure those elements are covered. Ready, set, go is the slide I titled this, and this is about project implementation and then sort of the billings or accounting part of it. For implementation, you don't want to start anything until you have a signed grant agreement with RCO. You want to make sure you comply with the milestones or the timeline that's included in your agreement. And then you definitely want a notice to proceed before you start work on your project proposal. And then you want to make sure you get it completed in a timely manner. So an example of something that you could start on early, but there's no guarantee you're going to get a grant, so you want to pay attention to your cost. But what you could start on early is securing your permits or preparing your designs to get ready for permitting. So there are a few things, and in our manual 4, we have a whole section that talks about eligible pre-agreement cost, and those are eligible pre-agreement cost for development or renovation projects. And in manual 3, we talk about eligible pre-agreement cost for acquisition. Eligible pre-agreement costs are typically those pre-construction costs, the things that you need to do to get you ready. We won't pay for doing your application, but we will pay for engineering, design, cultural resources, and so on. And then you see us talking about billings, progress reports, and records. Anybody that receives a grant from RCO, the way you get your money is on a reimbursement basis. You spend money to do some of the work, you submit us a bill, and then after you've paid it, we'll reimburse you and continue on until you've got your full grant amount. So just to give you a heads up that we do it on a reimbursement basis, and we can tell you a whole lot more about that. But our policy manual number 8 provides a summary, and then we have little video clips and all sorts of things to help you to understand that process for how you get paid. We'll also hold a webinar specifically for those of you that are awarded a grant to talk through some of these other considerations. And then one of the things you want to do is make sure you keep meticulous records, even starting now, when you are doing design work or you're looking at getting appraisals done or you're looking at different things that you need to do for implementing your project, document your records so that if you're awarded a grant, you'll have the information that you need to be able to bill. And that includes those volunteer hours, specifically what the volunteers were doing. Just make sure they are not doing any of the work on the ground or to implement a project, because if it happens before you have a grant agreement, it would no longer be eligible. And then we just say, as we work through the process, if something changes, we want to know about it as soon as possible to help you with that implementation phase. And then somebody asked the question about long-term compliance. Yes, there are. Our policy manual number 7 kind of lays out the guidelines for it. We want to make sure that the project that you're building or facilities that you're building, that they are available for the public for the long haul. And we will talk more to those of you that are asked to submit a final application. As many of you know, the compliance period for a youth athletics facilities project is at least 20 years after it's done. So you need to be thinking long range. Some things have a life expectancy of 20 years, others like pools, oftentimes 30 or 40 years. So we'll talk to you more about those long-term obligations, but you can look at this guidelines to just get an idea of what some of that is. It comes from a part of what we do as part of the long term. We do inspections to help ensure that you are in compliance. We tell you and remind you that you need to post acknowledgement signs for where the funding came from. We also want to make sure you're maintaining your facility and you're keeping it attractive and inviting to the public. And then if you get income, like you charge fees for certain things, that's totally fine to charge fees. We just want to make sure the fees that you're charging are commensurate with fees that would be used for other similar kinds of recreational opportunities. And then we also want to make sure that the income you get is used for development, acquisition, operation, and maintenance of outdoor recreation type elements. So there's a number of things that we have here for you to consider, and those are the kind of things that we will talk to you more about, particularly if you move on to the next round about what you might want to be thinking about in terms of long-term obligation. There's some things that are highlighted, additional consideration in the policy guidance, and then we hope to be able to provide you with even more information as time goes on. I just wanted to quickly pop up the timeline for you so you'll be thinking about what's happening. Our PRISM online database is open today, so you can actually start an application right now. But things you want to make sure you do is you want to make sure you actually have submitted that pre-application no later than midnight on March 13th. That's why you don't want to miss out. So make sure you get your application submitted on time. And what I would really encourage you to do, if you can do it today or before the end of the week, start your application. That gives us the opportunity to assign a grants manager, and we can start to work with you on what you might need to do in the next steps. So I know that there are probably some questions that are popping into your mind about some of those additional consideration. And as always, your grants manager is going to be available to help answer those. But one of the things that I wanted to tell you is, if you take a look on the web page for community outdoor athletic facilities, there's a sheet called Key Steps and Timelines. So I'm going to click over to our web page. This is our primary web page. This is the page for our community outdoor athletic facilities. And if you go to this particular page, and I'm going to show you how to get here in just a moment, you can scroll down and there are a number of grant resources to help you. The grant manual or brief guidelines for pre-applications, the key steps and timeline, the application checklist, how to set up an account for using our PRISM database, fact sheet about the program, and right here is that criteria mapping tool. This is a link that will take you to the map to help you figure out what some of your data-driven scores would actually be. Our schedule is listed on this page. It tells you all sorts of details about the program, some of the things that we've summarized in our talk, but this is one of those pages that it might be helpful for you to access just to get more information about our program. But the key steps is one of those things that helps to explain the different steps that Nick and I have been sharing with you. One of the things that we want to tell you, for those of you in particular who it's your first time, we just want to make sure you know that we use our own database for applicants to apply for grants. And I'm just going to share just a little bit about it. You can access it and get all the information you need straight off of our web page. And you'll notice that right on our web page, it talks about our grants and how to find a grant. Our PRISM logon page, you can link it straight from our first page. Our project search, where you can look at other grant applications to get an idea of some of the costs or charges or elements that you might need to include. It also has contacting us, and it's another way to kind of get an idea of who your grant managers are for this program. So our webpage has a wealth of information that might be useful to you. When you click on the grants portion, if you've not used our website, you see that once you click the word grants, either here or here where you find a grant, it'll list the acronyms for our grant programs. And for this program, you want to look at COAF, COAF, which stands for Community Outdoor Athletic Facilities. And once you click that link, it will take you to the web page that I just showed you for Community Outdoor Athletic Facilities. And if you'll notice, even from this page, you'll be able to click a button and start your application. This page also, when you scroll down to the bottom of it, there's a place where you can sign up on our homepage just to be on our mailing list for the Community Athletic Facility Program, or you can sign up for information about our application webinars, which are coming up on February 14, where we'll talk about some of the other grant programs that we have to offer this year. One other thing to look at is there's an account set up for applying for these grants. So if you don't know much about our PRISM database, there's a little sheet that's on our Community Athletic Facilities page that will tell you how to set up a secure access Washington account and creating your PRISM account so you can use our database to actually apply for grants. So you can access PRISM from our website. Just go to our PRISM page and click on the PRISM logon, and that will start to direct you. And there's guidance on that little sheet that I showed you, where you, if you've never used it before, you want to complete a PRISM new user account, create a SAW account, and that's an account to help you access the state's database systems. And then you'll start that out. You might have to do like a little double sign on, but I would encourage you to do that today so you can get that part taken care of, and then you can start your application once you've got that secure access logon. Another little thing is when you click on that Start an Application, you'll get a pop-up screen similar to this that will say New Application. And when you click on the New Application, you can see that's once you've signed into our PRISM online database. But once you click into that application page, it gives you an opportunity to tell who your organization is. You'll tell what grant program, and you want to choose Community Outdoor Athletic Facilities pre-application. And then you'll choose development or acquisition or combination, depending on your project. And by the way, if you're renovating something, choose development as your project type. We allow for new construction as well as renovation of existing facilities with that project type. And then choose a name for your project. We strongly encourage you to use your park name to start it out. So in this instance, it was Umatilla Skate Park renovation, or it might be the name of your park might be Harry Todd, and it might be Harry Todd basketball courts, or whatever it is. Try to use the name of the park project and then say what it is you're doing, and or keep your name succinct, the kind of name that's easy to put on your agreement, but one that helps to define your athletic complex or whatever it is that you are planning to submit. Once you get your project started and start your new application, it'll take you to a new screen. And this screen, I just want to mention, tells you how to navigate through the application. It'll tell you who are the parties, who's the primary sponsor, and on a rare occasion, there might be a secondary sponsor. It gives you a place to put in the contact people. Who is it that RCO will be working with to help get the project done? You could choose the contact person. You could choose the person that will process or sign the agreement. You can also choose the person that will manage your bills. This is just a navigation tree, and you will just go through all of the elements that's associated with your project. till you get to the one that allows you to submit. And any questions about navigating Prism, we are more than happy to help you to answer. Prism has an auto-save kind of feature, but what we strongly encourage you to do is to save often, just in case something happens, the computer system goes down, or you have to leave and come back. We don't want to lose your information, but make sure you click on the save factor as often as possible, just as you navigate. Once you get past that very first screen, so once you do this part and you say start a new application, it will assign you a project number, and it'll tell, like in this instance, it's got the project number, it tells the project type and the project name, the grant program, and the status, of course, is pre-application. So you want to do that. When you fill a page, you can always click this button, and it will let you know with some red lettering if there's something that's missing that you need to do before you move on to the next page. So just wanted to give you a brief idea of what an application will look like. And it's great to start it now, because then that'll help you to see the other screens and data that you'll need to fill to complete your pre-application. And of course, we have available to you from that web page our pre-application checklist. That checklist will let you know that you will be providing us with some project details, some metrics is what we call it, some additional information like cost details for your project. It lets you know what kind of attachments we allow you to include. For example, we'll allow you to include a couple of pages of visuals. You might want to do a collage because you're limited to 2 pages and you don't want to exceed it because you don't want your application to be kicked out because you forgot to do something. And then there's the staff scoring page or RCO data scoring page that just lets you know what your scores are once you've placed a point on a map to tell us where your project is. So that'll tell you what those scores actually are going to be. And then there's a page that allows you to actually submit the application. It's not excessively complex, but I encourage you to pull the checklist so you kind of know the steps you need to take. And once you start your application, you can just go through the screens and kind of see what's coming next and know some of the information that you'll need to include in your project. We're not asking for as much details as we will ask for a final application, but that's because we want the minimum information that the evaluators will need to help them understand your scope of work and how much it's going to cost, and to be able to score the responses that you provide for those first 2 criteria that Nick talked about. Some quick tips for you. Communicate with your grants manager. They're here to help. Read your manuals or materials carefully and closely. And I know you may not have a chance to read all of it, but looking typically about those key pieces and checking in with your grants manager if you have a question about something is great, because we want to make sure you know what you're doing as you go through the process. Save your pre-application checklist somewhere so you can keep track of what you've done and what you still need to do. Start your pre-application now. Scope and budget. Think about the scope of work you want to do. Do you have inbounds elements before you start to add some of those support amenity or those things that are outside of the field of play? Don't forget to include costs for permitting or for cultural resources. And then you want to make sure, as you're thinking about cultural resources, are you building or putting your facility in a way that you can avoid negative impacts to wetlands or to cultural resources? That's the ideal thing, if it's all possible, you want to do. You don't want to have negative impact on the environmental features of your site. And then confirm eligibility with us before you hit the submit button. So that's why we encourage you to start your application now, so the grant manager can be talking to you. You can make sure things are eligible before you actually submit them. And by all means, don't miss out. We want to make sure that you have an opportunity to participate in this program. I just popped up some questions that we often get. We've already shared with you that COAF can be used as match for some other RCO grant programs. You know that pre-applications are due March 13. There is a checklist that you can find on the COAF Act page. We will give you those pre-application results by May 10th so that you have an opportunity to start your new application. So think about that first week in May. That's when we hope the evaluators are all done with their work, and we will be sending out the invitation to those of you that will be asked to move to the second step. And I think you know now how to find your grants manager by starting your pre-application so we can assign someone. And yes, you can see your data scores just by going and clicking on that data tool. Remember the example that Nick showed? It showed that there was a project that he was looking at and their data scores in advance are 4. So they already know how many points they would get for that part of their application. And one thing, I put a question up here, just may all of our staff use the same PRISM logon? Please don't do that. Please make sure that everybody that's going to work on your application is associated with your organization and they sign up for their individual PRISM logon. I'm going to make sure our data person knows that some of you are going to be in touch right away because you need to get that logon. So get started with it. And then that way we can get you assigned and ready to use PRISM and get your application started. By the way, if you start an application and then something comes up and you decide not to submit it, maybe it's that you had 2 projects and you just want to focus on one, let us know. We'll remove or move that project that you're not going to do to wastebasket. We just need a little email from you with the reason you want us to move it out of the way so that we can document it before we move it to wastebasket, knowing that you might come back and apply for a different program or something later on. We just want to get it out of the queue so we always have a good count of how many people are thinking about applying. So I hope that answers some of the questions that you might have in mind. And remember, your outdoor grants managers are always going to be available. I shouldn't say they'll always be available, but they are wanting to help you. So start your pre-application. We'll get somebody assigned because we're here to help. And if the grant manager isn't available, I'm going to be available to help fill in questions. We have senior outdoor grant managers that will help us to answer questions. Our goal is to help you figure things out as quickly as possible so that you can get started and get moving forward. There is a fact sheet that's available on our webpage. This is great for sharing with people in your community or sharing with your governing body to help them know about this program, what its purpose is. And also on that page, there's information about how to get in touch with Nick or other grant managers. And that way, if you have questions, Nick will route your questions to the appropriate grant manager or to myself so he can continue to work on policy work and some other things, but we are available to try to help and answer in any way that we possibly can. I want to just say thank you so much for spending time with us. There may be, Henry, before we close out, I just want to see if there are any last minute questions that we need to address. Nick, you might have questions. There may be some for you. So Henry, is there something that we didn't cover or that we need to answer before we sign off?
Yeah, will applicants be notified if they did not make it to the final application process?
Actually, they will. So one is when we get done with, if you notice everybody is in a different region, when we get done with the region, if applicants submitted a proposal, you will probably get an email from myself or from Nick letting you know that here are the entities that have been invited to submit a follow-up application. And we'll want to make sure that you know that just in case you want to plan for submitting your project proposal. And our goal is to try to let you know far enough in advance if we can to give you an opportunity to submit a youth athletic facilities program project if you want to do that, if you don't qualify or you're not invited to submit to this one. So yes, we will do our best to get that info out as quickly as possible. And we might encourage you, even if we're not sure, we'll do our best to try to get those scores to you as fast as the evaluators get finished with them. So yes, we do plan to let you know.
Marguerite, I have a quick question, and apologies, Henry. I think I just, if you're, say, a smaller organization and you're thinking, we've never hired or contracted with an archaeologist before, we don't have sort of final, numbers for, like our construction costs. We think we can make a good guess. Should we even still apply? I wonder, I could see people asking that. What would you say, or how do you answer that?
I would say absolutely. I mean, that's what this program is for. And a part of what we will do as grant managers is not only encourage you to apply, but we have resources that are available on our web page to talk about cultural resources, how to find a consultant to help you do that work. And we have plenty of successful applicants, particularly with our youth athletic facilities program. And you can see some of their cost estimates, what kind of costs they included for certain type of cultural resources, project proposals. We have planning grants where people are doing that right now. So by all means, touch base with us and we will help you to figure that part out.
And if your estimates, in your pre-application, it turns out, they end up being very different if you're invited to a final, that's okay?
That's okay.
Great.
When you are invited to the final, you can't change your scope of work too much. You might make some tweaks to it, but what you can change are your cost. Because the more you get into it, there may be things that your grant manager is telling you, hey, you included this, but you didn't include any money for access path, or you forgot to include money for signs. So there will be an opportunity, or you start to just talk to some contractors to get an idea of what it costs to resurface a court. And so you may need to update those costs. We do give you an opportunity to make modifications to finalize your project proposal. You won't be able to change your responses to the initial criteria, those 2 questions that you have to answer now, but there are other things that you will need to address and answer to prepare your final application. Anything else, Henry?
Do you want to reiterate one more time how to get in contact with your grants manager?
Absolutely, because that's an important part. So 1, start your pre-application is one way to get in touch with your grant manager and find out who it is. Some of you already know, but there are those of you that have never contacted us before. By all means, you can contact me. My information is on our website, and I'm just going to click to our webpage and I want to show you. From our webpage, you will see a little button that says Contact Us. When you hover over that button, it will say Grants Managers. You can click on Grants Managers and it'll take you to a page where you'll see an image of some grant managers, and then it says Contact a Grants Manager. The best way to do that is to scroll on this side, and when it asks for grant programs, choose Recreation and Conservation Grants. And I'm going to talk to our communications manager, because usually right here, you can choose programs. And for most of you, if you went down and you chose youth athletic facilities, it will bring up grant managers that work on that particular program. And so I'm just going to remind them that they need to include community outdoor athletic facilities. But even if you just chose this, that's one way to find your grant manager, or you can choose your county. If you choose and say, oh, I happen to be in Garfield County, I want to know who my grants manager is. As soon as you put Garfield County, it'll pop up your grant manager, and Jesse Sims is the outdoor recreation grant manager that works with a lot of the communities on the east side of the state. So that's one way to get in touch with your outdoor grants manager. Anything else, Henry?
That's it, I think.
Thank you so much for joining us for this webinar. It's a little longer than what we planned for, but we wanted to make sure we gave you the kind of information that we hope will help you to make a decision about submitting a proposal to RCO for the grant program and the process. So thank you very much. We will send out a notice to all of you that joined us today to let you know when this webinar is posted and ready for review, just in case you want to go back and look at something again. So thanks again and have a great day. And we look forward to seeing your grant proposals. Thanks much.